Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Folk Film Gathering, which, both for better and for worse, is all online this year. My name's Jamie Chambers. I am the curator of the festival. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. Our programme this year revolves around a theme of solidarity, and we're exploring that both through a series of films which are available to screen if you've got a festival pass. Please do check those out. We've got some fantastic films, including the newest film by Tyneside's Amber Collective about the miners' strike in County Durham. We've got a fantastic film by Nadir Boumouche called A Musu about an indigenous occupation of a silver mine in Morocco. And we've also got an amazing film about the history of the labour movement in Asturias in Spain. So do please check out some of the films we have on offer this week. And we're also exploring this theme of solidarity through a series of conversations, one a night, some between filmmakers and some between musicians. But when we were putting our programme together, we wanted to think very carefully about how this theme of solidarity applies to current events in Scotland. And from our perspective, there really is no more resonant or inspiring an example of solidarity in Scotland in recent times than the events on Kenmure Street, which are going to be explored today. And we really felt like that was something that we wanted to give a platform to, and we wanted to explore. And in doing so, we reached out to our friends at Bella Caledonia, who we've had a really great partnership with over the past couple of years. And we are very grateful to tonight's hosts, who I'll pass you over to in just a second, the arts and music editors at Bella, Iona Lee and Jim Monaghan, who have put together a really great panel for you this evening. Just a few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. Firstly, this event is obviously being recorded, and we will be looking to share it online afterwards. We have closed captions available for any audience members that need them. I believe that these can either be viewed through Zoom, if you want to access them through Zoom, if you just go to the bottom to the menu bar where it says More, and then there should be an option there which says Show Subtitle. Or alternatively, my colleagues have posted an external link in the chat, which I believe is better for Mac users. Jim and Iona will go over this in a wee minute, but please do feel free to ask questions. I believe Jim and Iona are keen to kind of get a discussion going and would really welcome any questions that you guys in the audience have. So without further ado, I'll pass over to tonight's hosts. Jim and Iona, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. So Kenmure Street, that day in Kenmure Street, I just happened to be in Kenmure Street in the morning, and I got a phone call from Iona. And Iona, I think you were there. You were there before me, which confused me initially. I think because you live in Leith. So how did you come about to be there so early in the morning?
So I used to live in Govanhill. I moved away in August last year to come back to Leith, which is nearer where I'm from. But I happened to be through for the day because I was having hospital appointments. I had knee surgery now 3 weeks ago, and it was in the run up to that. I was having appointments. So because I used to live in that area, I was being seen by a surgeon there. So I had just happened to be there for the day. And I was coming back to my friend's house who I was staying with quite early in the morning. It was still only about 11:15, I think. And I had 2 donuts with me, and I was going to go home and sit down and hang out with my friend. And I saw at the corner of my eye something happening. I wasn't sure what, but I'm nosy. So I went over. And as I got closer, I sort of gauged what was happening. I don't know if I'd have gauged what was happening as quickly as I did if it wasn't for the fact that sort of my social circles on social media had been talking at the time about immigration vans, and I'd seen posts sort of saying, this is what an immigration van looks like, this is what your rights are, this is what to do if you see one. So I had nowhere to be and nothing to do, so I thought, well, I'll hang about. And also, you know, already there was a sort of gathering of people there. There were people sat behind it. There were people talking to the police. It was sort of something to see as well. And I stuck about, and I didn't know I would be there for another, 7 hours. But I was, and it was really interesting to sort of watch the day unfold. Um, I gave you a call because I thought Jim lives here, and Jim's always at stuff like this.
Yeah, I'm usually there. I'm usually there first. But it's yeah, it was quite interesting when I got there. There seemed to be a very, very quick mobilisation. I mean, initially, I think it was a no evictions network that had cottoned on to this arrest taking place and had managed to get someone under the van and prevent, at least block the initial arrest happening. But very, very quickly there was so many people there. It was quite a quick mobilisation. Yeah.
I think when I was first there, at a guess there might have been about 30 people, maybe 40, and by the end there were definitely 1,000,
Yeah.
which was a really amazing thing to witness happen, sort of the slow growth of people. And something that you and I talked about, Jim, when we were talking about this the other day, we're both arts editors. I mean, I'm here as quite an ignorant participant. I'm looking forward to learning more about, what the implications were. But I was there more just as a person who used to live there. And what I noticed over the day was how many people that we'd covered in Bella were there. Singer-songwriters, artists, musicians. There was so many people of around my age group, and all age groups as well, but so many people that I recognized from having written pieces on their albums. There were just so many like young artists and musicians and poets there, which was really cool to see, and I guess made me believe that there is.
I think that's I think there's a thing. Certainly at the moment, it's probably always been there of arts and activism, but I think especially in Scotland right now there is a kind of a sort of general acceptance. I mean, almost every artist I know is involved in politics in one way or another. It's increased since 2014. I think that this would be good. When I got along, I think it'd be about 11:30 after getting a call from Iona, and I think I got a text from Fatima, who was in Edinburgh at the time and trying to rush back to say you better get down to Kenmure Street. And so this would be a good time to show the first clip, Jamie, just of, I think this was reasonably early. There was already like 100 or so people there. That was not that one, not the Queen meeting. Yeah, that was. I mean, they let them go. I think one of the sort of main chants all day was "These are our neighbours, let them go," which is quite a powerful thing. And I think it's probably a good time to bring in Fatima, who has lived in Kenmure Street for I think about 20 years or so. I don't know if you want to switch your screen and unmute yourself, Fatima.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. Yes, not quite 20 years, but not far off. Yeah, and I was actually in Leith. I had my first day off from Govan Hill, so I'd left Kenmure Street that morning. First day off in about 6 months. But I'd take myself down to Leith for the day, and then I got a text message. Well, not a text message. I got a WhatsApp message. I'm part of the Stand Up to Racism WhatsApp group, which just keeps us all on our toes about what's happening around asylum seekers and refugees and Black Lives Matter. And very early on, and so I was just on the phone calling everybody. But I think we got a Daily Record article very early. I think by about 11 o'clock, the Daily Record had covered it, which I think was really important. But do you know what? That is a very specific corner in Kenmure Street as well, where it is an intersection where there's a lot of traffic going through to Govan Hill, down to Dumbreck, down to Shawlands and so on. But what I think attracted a lot of people was the police presence, because even when there was only 20 or 30 people there, the police turned up en masse, and they just kept growing and growing and growing in numbers with vans and riot gear and so on. And who's going to pass that and not have a nosy and rubberneck? So it wasn't just our phone tree and what was happening locally with the tight-knit community, but also the media coverage we're getting. But the police also were one of the reasons more and more people turned up. And then when you saw how many cops were there, you encourage more people to turn up to try and outnumber them. So there, yeah.
I mean, as a neighbourhood, Pollock Shields is specifically Kenmure Street. I've noticed that there's a lot of political posters and windows as you go past, but there's a lot going on. And do you think that sort of thing, whether it's just kids' fun days or litter picks, there's always sort of something happening. Does that strengthen the community so when something important and serious happens, everyone knows each other and can quickly link up?
Do you know, in many ways, it's like any other neighborhood in that windows were really, really important during the pandemic for putting up posters of hope, you know, the rainbows, just sort of looking out for one another. And then Black Lives Matter happened. And then the windows were transformed into billboards, you know, about what you stood, very political, very, very angry messages. And in Pollock Shields being a very, very, I think it's the biggest Muslim population in Scotland lives in Pollock Shields, who are Black, of course. A number of madrasas on that street, Gurdwara just around the corner. Then you've got a number of mosques and so on. So it's always been an attraction for people, immigrants like myself, living there. But also it has very tight-knit community organisations and groups, including Mutual Aid and the Bowling Green and community-based activities. So in one way, it's very similar to a lot of communities, but of course, on the other hand, it's got a much more of a political undercurrent there because of the oppression Black people feel and the racism they feel. And Black Lives Matter was important in this, in that it gave Black people confidence that they can be heard and they had something to say. So I think, yeah, similar to a lot of communities, but also very different as well.
That's one thing I was wondering about mentioning Leith. Leith is another place where sort of windows became like galleries or like billboards, ways that we were communicating with each other. But even though Leith is also quite similar in certain ways to that area of south side of Glasgow, I was wondering if something like the events of that day would unfold in the same way somewhere like here, because I think that the way that was able to happen was this tight community, and also so many people who have the same sort of ideas and ideals being able to like come together so quickly and be in the same space. I don't know if in Leith it would play out the same way, even though it's technically quite a similar area. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, about why that might be, that it might not play out the same way in another part of.
Well, do you know, communities surprise you, and you should never underestimate how quick solidarity can grow. When you see people on the street and you see people standing up, it's quite infectious. And I think you should never underestimate your communities, and something that starts off small can grow so quickly. I really admire the first group of people who didn't move. I think that was really, really important. But yes, I mean, if you were going to have a similar thing where there was hardly any community, that's a different matter. But I truly believe not just Scotland, but people's humanity comes to the fore when they see people in distress. And here were two people surrounded by police in a van. Your first reaction is, what's happening? Something has happened, you know. And when you hear that these two men, Sumit Sedev and Lakvir Singh, who'd been in our community for 10 years, you know, so they came in their early 20s, been there for 10 years and not being given the right to remain. That message got passed quickly, you know, because there were people, their neighbours came out and so on. Information started spreading, things started growing. But it's not just about Pollock Shields. I think it's really important that these things can erupt anywhere. We are unique in some ways, but also, I mean, look at the Glasgow girls and so on. There's loads of incidences where people have come out in solidarity with people in distress and being quite brave about it.
But one of the things I do remember, and I'm trying to remember when this might have been, it's at least 5 years, it's probably more, when the SDL, the sort of far right fascist group, attempted to come to Pollock I think this would be a good time to bring in Amar, because he was at the forefront of that, as well as at the forefront of many of these kind of actions over the year. If you could switch on your screen and unmute yourself, Amar, you will appear to.
Sorry, I was just trying to finish my crisps out.
I don't know if you remember that. If you remember back then, I'm not sure how many years ago that was when the
I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, because it was me and that was myself and Osama Said that set up Scotland United, which was the organisation we set up to oppose when the English Defence League said they were going to launch the Scottish Defence League.
Yeah.
And at that time, what they said was that they were going to march on Glasgow Central Mosque, and that they wanted to come to Pollock Shields. And I remember in discussions, robust discussions that we had with the police, the line that was drawn was, you have no options. There will be no negotiation. If you allow the SDL to march on the mosque, to march in our communities, to march with Pollock Shields, then you will see the response, which will be thousands of black, white, Asian, white, gay, straight people just coming out as the communities. I remember having huge rows at that time with the Central Mosque and many of the mosques, because the elders from the community were telling people in the community, do not go out in the streets. People will be attacked. You'll get into trouble with the law. There'll be violence, etc. and all that. I said, no, there's more of us than there are of them. We can crush this. Yeah. And we won the argument. And to be honest, to be fair, it was like leaders from all the political parties came out in the march, right across. The SDL were basically bought in. They surprisingly or stupidly, I mean, it's not exactly the master race at the best of times, but I mean, they organised around Stewart Street, the corner from Stewart Street. They decided to meet in a pub 300 yards away from the city centre police station. So, of course, they were corralled and they were kettled in, about something like 50 or 60 of them, and surrounded, and then were frog marched onto buses and were not allowed the right to march. And it was a victory. It was a victory parade for us. But that line was set, and it's a line that I've said in each and every time that we've been in negotiations with the police. We will not allow the Nazis to march on our streets. We will not allow the fascists to march on our streets. And that's been, and actually in terms of even Kenmure Street, it takes me right back to, I remember being on the Govan Hill pool protest back in 2001. And when, I remember the police at the time talking about it. I think it was ACC Colin McErica, who was head of CID. And again, I suppose a hazard of becoming being an activist in a campaign and then becoming a lawyer around that time. But at the start of my legal career, going behind the police line, because it got to about 9, 10 o'clock, and the police were busy describing to the newspapers the worst violence they'd seen, on mainland in Scotland ever. And I was thinking all the time, I was thinking about miners' strike, about the police attacking them, about other, situations. And I thought the worst that it got to was a pineapple being thrown, at a police officer. One of my clients being accused of, using a water gun, a water pistol, and spraying, and a young boy who the trial took several months. It was 14, 15 charges, and eventually it was down to 3, and various others who were charged with criminal offences. But I remember at that time, again, it was a case of people came out of the community together, and at that time there was a lot of talk and division within the community. Asylum seekers were arriving, within Glasgow. There was, the Daily Record was a rag that was printing sort of, looked no different to the Daily Mail or to the Sun at the time, and were, attacking asylum seekers coming to country. So they were sowing real seeds of division within the community. And then that night we had the Govan Hill, and everybody came together. I remember going behind the police line and saying, you can retreat. If you retreat, people will go home, but you have to retreat. This is our community. You guys need to leave. You're the ones who are standing in the line. No, we can't do it. I said, you're the only ones that are causing the trouble. If you go, and then people will move away. And eventually the police line moved right back. They started to filter out. And I remember going back to the crowd to listen, people are going to start getting lifted now. But the bottom line is we won. We have won, right? And then people started to sort of filter away. And it just showed, it was like the crowd then just moved away and the police were off into their vans. And that reminded me then the next day, of course, we had the murder of Ferzat Dag, that night, I think it was, or that day. And the next day, I remember going to Sight Hill, because I remember marching with Mohammed Asif, getting down there, and we organised very quickly a march, and 1,000 asylum seekers marched on Glasgow City Council, demanding justice. And I remember the horror of when we marched with the asylum seekers, that people were throwing bricks, they were throwing stones, at asylum seekers, saying, if you come back to this, if you come back, we will kill your children. They're shouting racist abuse. and and the police were basically alongside. And we got to George Square. I remember the police having to organize buses for safety because the asylum seekers were worried. And I remember that heartbreaking moment going, Jesus Christ, this is, last night we're in Govan Hill, where the people come together. And then the next day, you have that situation, and people were despondent and said, Glasgow's racist. The people are racist. You scrape the surface and they'll come out. And this was, of course, one of the most impoverished communities in the whole of Europe. But what I remember proudly is that within the space of 2 to 3 months, we worked night and day in going back into that community because, the press were like parasites. They were like hovering over the community. They're wanting, to get pictures of asylum seekers being attacked, interviewing people, like propaganda. The far right were trying to get into Sighthill. The local MP, who's now, I think, a lord in the House of Commons, was atrocious. The victimization of the asylum seekers. But what we did was we got in the community. I remember being called a Paki going into, to the community centre and trying to sit down. And there was parts of me that just wanted to get up and walk away. And I thought, what's that going to achieve? And actually having the arguments and taking them on the head and explaining. And what we had within the 2 to 3 months was that we had the first march ever anywhere in the United Kingdom of Sighthill United Against Racism and Poverty, where we had the same individuals who had been racist, who had given abuse, who actually came out, in their hundreds, and that we all marched together on Glasgow City Council together as a community. And that built up real roots, which was a pre-runner of, the Glasgow Girls, the stopping dawn raids and things like that. That actually brought people together, like Mohammed Asif, who has been central, for the last 20 years in terms of everything. So obviously, when it came to that, takes me up to modern day in terms of Kenmure Street. And Kenmure Street, that morning, that day for me was Eid, right? So I was meeting my children. I was actually supposed to be, and you're talking about the lovies and the artists and all that post. I was actually supposed to be acting the following week on the island of Gia. For a program that's due to come out, playing the role of a lawyer, of course, so just playing myself. So I was actually supposed to be in isolation. So when I got the first phone calls and I started seeing, well, what the hell's going on? I had local politicians contacted. There was Paul Sweeney put stuff up. People come in. I had Rhiannon Spears sent me text saying, where are you coming down? And I was thinking, well, I've got the kids. And I thought, at first when I looked, but as I watched the pictures building up, and then people started phoning me and saying, they're sending in riot vans. And I saw the pictures, and this got to and there was part of me wanting to tear away and thinking, right, I've got the kids, supposed to be celebrating with them, and I had my full suit on. Sometimes people think I got to sleep in my suit. I don't, but I had my suit on that day in the morning, supposed to be at work, and then eventually it got to about 1 o'clock, 1:30. I thought, no, I need to go, because when I started getting phone calls from people saying they're swamping the area with riot vans, they're sending the ambulances in, and it's a trick to try and disperse the crowd, saying, they need help and all the rest of it. And I thought, I'll go down. So I then contacted the police and spoke to the police. And I said, I'm going down to the area. And they welcomed the fact that I was coming down. But when I got down there, I asked to see the commanding officer. And I had my 3 children with me. And at one point, I had my mask on. And I was thinking, when I got there, and I could hear the roar of the crowd. And it just filled you with an absolute buzz, because you thought, this is our community. This is Pollokshields. This is the same community that stood in unity after the murder of Imran Khan, that stood in unity after the murder of Chris Donald, that didn't allow the BNP to come in. It's always been a vibrant community, despite the far right and others trying to divide it. And I thought, this is our community. It's not just belong to the people of Pollokshields, but the people of Glasgow. I looked across the sort of places, and I walked over my 3 kids, and I thought, first of all, I'm supposed to be in hiding. I'm supposed to be in isolation. And straight away, the cameras turned around, and when people started, and then folks sort of, as I said, Amma's here or whatever. So before going to police, I just went straight onto the megaphone and spoke to the crowd. And my line was pretty simple, because I saw it, but nobody's moving. There is only one solution here. And the one solution is those men have to be released with a guarantee that they will not be arrested. This is racist Priti Patel, her racist Home Office. What exactly did they think by sending the Home Office vans in on the holiest day in the Muslim calendar into the heart of our community? How did they think our community was going to react? And then following that, I went back, obviously, to speak to the police, and took my kids with me and said to a police officer, it's the only time I'm ever going to do it, I said to the police, could you keep an eye on my 3 children? Whilst I went into the van to speak to the police out of sight of the press and the crowd, and spoke to them. And I said, there's multiple options here. And they said, well, we really welcome. And I obviously had discussions. And I could tell that, the police didn't want to be there, at the same time. But I said to them, I had robust discussions. I said, what the hell's going on? You have bought something like 40 riot vans into the area. You've got hundreds of officers around the corner, vans all over the place. This is up, it's not the crowd. The crowd is peaceful. Crowd are diverse from all sections of the community that are there. They're not wanting to cause, they're actually coming out to support, they're taking a stand against violence. And I said to them, I said, well, what's the options? And I said, the first option is you release the men into my custody. You release them, you guarantee that the immigration will not arrest them. The police will not arrest them. I also knew that at the end of the day, that my head was on a plate, because if I went back to the crowd and said, release them, the next thing that they're getting arrested, that's it. It's game over. And I said, I just need to have a guarantee. And he said, well, that clearly is not possible. And I knew on the basis of the fact that they were trying to communicate with the Home Office, etc. The Home Office weren't shifting. And then I said to them, on the back of what had happened with the football only a few weeks earlier, in terms of George Square and all that, I said, well, hang on a second. At that stage, what you said was that and I took the line that was used when I questioned the police previously about the upholding of public safety was of paramount importance, and not inflaming the situation, and not causing more violence, and not allowing serious criminality to break out. And I said, well, they said, well, it's not possible to do. So, well, the second option is this: you have your 40 riot vans, you have your 100 police officers, they have weapons, send them in, break up the crowd, let the police riot, attack the crowd. And I said, and you will be picking up the police for the next 20 years in this community, and it will spread. And it's no different to what I'd said to ACC McKerricker in August 2001, when I said Bradford riots had happened, and the police thought, oh my God, this is like Govan Hill's going to end up in the same way. I said, you're sitting on a powder keg, and this will spread if you do not retreat. If you actually realize the community is actually not wanting to cause violence, they actually want to do this peacefully. And peaceful protests, of course, the police have said continuously, they have to hold it because of the European Convention on Human Rights. There is no risk of violence here. There's nothing being done there. And what I said to him was, the choice is either. I said, look at this. This is the text, and this is the the Twitter from the First Minister and from Hamza Yusuf. That it's either that the government, the people are on one side, or you take a line where you back Priti Patel. Which side are you on? Are you police Scotland, or are you policing for Priti Patel? So of course they had to go away and think about it. And I said, they obviously didn't want to attack the crowd. And then went back in the crowd again. And the atmosphere is built. And of course, I said to the police, by 4 or 5 o'clock, people are finishing work and they're coming home. And the word message is spreading. People were accused of, organizing a mob. Priti Patel called it a mob. I mean, if that's what she calls a mob, then we know what mobs look like. We've seen it plenty of times. And that was a peaceful demonstration, people power that came out. And the bottom line was, it was people power that won. I know people tried to jump on and sort of go, oh, well, it was this and that. But the bottom line here was the police saw people power. They knew the consequences of sending in the police to attack, to do what at the end of the day. The result, as I said to police, was probably in 7 days' time or 14 days' time, these men may potentially end up being released, because they can't deport them. It was deliberate. It was done in Nicola Sturgeon's constituency. It was done, without calling for police support. What exactly did they think was going to happen? Because normally the police are involved and contacted. And then the police came back to me and said, well, we've got an agreement. And the agreement was that they would be released into my custody. And I said, right, okay, well, I want to go into the van. And of course, it was announced to the crowd, and the huge cheer went up, that I said that the people, Glasgow people of Pollokshields have won. These men will be released, that they will be free. And I have to be honest, a case of just before that, after I came out of the van and then we went back to crowd, I told my friend to take my 2 daughters, because I didn't know which way it was going to go. I mean, I honestly didn't. I thought, will they take their orders from the Home Office, or will they do policing by consent, i.e. people power? I didn't know. And I said, I said to my son, right, you stay by my side. And 2 young girls were taken away. And I eventually, when we came back into the crowd, police came back and said, right, release us. So and I remember this because it will rank in my sort of top 3 moments of my life of political campaigning.
We've actually got footage of that. It'd be quite a good time to show that footage of you announcing
fire away
to the crowd. Again, for anyone that's watching this, we have to thank Francis Lopez, who filmed. I think he was there about 10:30 in the morning and filmed all the events of the day. So I think, Jamie, it's the number 5, clip 5, I think.
This is your life.
Yeah. Well, not this one, number 5, Jamie. That's my next one. That's the.
Right, can I just say, from negotiating with the police, negotiations had come off. The position was this, that all day long, the First Minister, the the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, and I understand Police Scotland have been in discussions and trying to get the Home Office to listen. That has obviously now paid off. The Home Office has agreed to these two individuals being released into the safe custody of myself. The police will form a cordon when they are released from the van. What I'm asking you, and this is serious, right, because otherwise, you know, all bets are off. Listen. We have an agreement, it is in writing, these men will be released safely, they will not be arrested, there will be no enforcement action against them, and I have an agreement that they will then, the police will form a cordon around the van with myself and the two men, and then we will be walked to the mosque where they will be released. I would ask everyone to keep a distance, and once they are released into the mosque, for everyone to then disperse so that the vans, the horses, the police officers can disperse from this community. Everyone in this community should be extremely proud of what we have achieved. Community, we will stand shoulder to shoulder with our neighbours, and we will not let you carry out your dawn raids or treat human beings like you have tried to do today. Told to go to the van, the police will need you to move back, right? Move, and what will need you to move back in order that we can get the two men out of the van, right? Don't need to do it just now, wait until I'm told by the police, right? And when they say move back, I don't want anyone to try and do any antics. We have got an agreement here. The police want to leave this area, many of us want to go back to our families.
There's the Queen again.
I don't know why the Queen pops up there. As you mentioned, the Glasgow girls there, Rosa, who was supposed to be here tonight, but unfortunately something else popped up, was standing right next to you there. Mohammed Ali, that you had mentioned earlier, was standing there. And I think there's a kind of, to me, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but there is a kind of continuity. When you mentioned earlier Govanhill Baths and the lad that was arrested for the water pistol thing, who was Qasim Khan.
Qasim Khan, yeah.
Straight after the physical dag stabbing happened the next day, 9/11 happened just weeks later. Mm-hmm. And I saw those young guys that were involved in Govanhill Baths throughout the Stop the War movement. And I think sometimes these moments, these sort of trigger moments where communities come together can be, they can politicize people. They can be moments that bring people into movements. So.
Absolutely, because I mean, for me, when I walked in with my kids and I looked across, and I was just checking out, you know, scouring the crowd, and I was just seeing faces popping up, and there were faces I'd recognized from 30 years ago from activism, from 20 years ago, from 10 years ago, from 5 years ago, and of course the best part of it is all the other new faces that haven't been for such a long time, but also interlinked together. You know, there wasn't anything like it's us and them, wasn't any separation. You saw new politicians, you saw MPs, you saw councillors, you saw local people just standing together, and everybody was, you know, there was no way that they were going to be able to divide them, because as I said to the police, there is no way you're going into that crowd that anyone is going to allow those men, you know, to be taken away. And people, I knew in my head that people are going to come out of their houses. People are going to join, because if already, you know, you got up to 1,000 after several hours, you're going to get a hell of a lot more. And I say that, I mean, going up to that van and opening the door and walking into the van, and these men had been in that van for some 8 hours. And I also think my credit due to the young man who, as soon as they were taken out of the house, you know, jumped under the wheels of the van. If it had not been for him, these men would have been gone. And he stayed there. And before I went to the van, I remember the first thing that happened was the police said to me, some of the protesters said to me, we want some guarantees. And I was like, well, I've got the guarantees. Went, no, guarantees for the boy that's underneath the van. And I went, oh shit. Right. So I was like, right. So I had to turn around and the police go and I said, listen, I want a guarantee this boy is not going to be arrested, otherwise not going to the van. And they were like, listen, we're not doing any arrests. The boy came out, and I remember like getting on my knees and getting down to listen. And he's like, I want some guarantees. And he's like, look, the guarantees are the boys are getting released. They're getting released. They'll be free. He went, no, I want some guarantees. Who are you? And I was like, I said, I'm the lawyer for the boys. And he went, right, brilliant, great, getting out. So he got out. There was a huge cheer when he came out. And then when going into the van, I remember having tears in my eyes. The boys in the van had tears in their eyes. When I opened it up, spoke to them in Punjabi, and I said, you're free. And you're free, and turning around and say, you're free because of the people of Glasgow, because of the people here. And they got out of the van, and a huge cheer, and they're walking down, and it was a case of, I just remember the cordon, and my son was at the side, and the two boys came out, Mohammed Asif, because the police were trying to push them and said, no, Asif stays put. Because Asif was there right from the start and was mobilizing and organizing, and obviously see Rosa's face there, which is why I said the Glasgow girls are now Glasgow women, and just seen so many faces. And it was the joy, the tears, the absolute, after we've been through COVID, I remember the frustrations over the course of last year, seeing people, running around on the issue of football, but when people are being murdered, when people are dying because of police violence and things, we're being told, no, you stay at home, don't do this, don't do that. And seeing that, and then when we marched, and I remember when the cordon was phoned up, the best part of it all was when the crowd kettled the police. Yay! So for the very first time, they actually found out what it feels like to be kettled in by a peaceful protest, civilized, organized together and marching. And we marched to the madrasa. And I still remember at the point, because I think maybe one of the guys who was taking the march, which got the millions of views, was from Eileen Reid, the daughter of Jimmy Reid. And she was on the top. And I remember looking up, and I heard to shout Amma or whatever through the crowd or whatever. And I looked up and I had tears in my eyes because I was just looking and going, this is amazing. Never ever thought that we would take on Priti Patel in this situation and we'd beat her, and looking up and just shouting and then getting to, to the madrasa and then marching up. And what people didn't know was the madrasa was shut. So we went around the back, and then we came out, spoke to the crowd and said that they're released, that they're free. And the huge roar from the crowd, and then people dispersed, and it was a happy day. And to me, it very much summed up, it is one of those moments that people who've been on that will remember for the rest of their lives. And I always say it because as a lawyer, people always say, well, how do you keep going with the cases you do? Some cases take 15, a choker, racist murder took 18 years to get justice. Shiku Bayo, it's been 6 years. It'll probably be another 4 or 5 years until a public inquiry. Emma Colwell, 16 years we've been fighting for justice for the mother of, murdered Emma Colwell. And it's a case of people say, how do you come on? I said, every so often you win one case or you win one protest. And that gives you the spirit, the inspiration to keep going for another 100. And I almost felt like so many people in that crowd needed that uplifting experience to actually go, do you know what? We'll be back again, and we'll be back, and we'll be back, and we'll be back, because that one win was a huge defeat for a barbaric, racist immigration policy of Westminster that's created that climate of fear that wants us to be suspects and wants us to be divided as a community. And actually, people didn't give a damn. People said to me afterwards, some people, like lots of abuse from the racists, the far right, and other commentators saying, oh, they were Indian, they were Sikh. Why were they going to the mosque? And I went, that was to prove a point. We're going to a Muslim, madrasa because they're Sikh men to show this community is not going to be divided. Oh, but they were Indian. What's that got to do with they're Sikh? And I went, nothing, probably absolutely nothing, apart from the fact that everybody's at home in the community and that everybody came together that day.
I think it's a very important point about Pollock Shields. Maybe something you could speak on, Fatima, is but people. I think quite often in Scottish people sort of look at a community, say it's an Asian community or it's a Muslim community, and they don't actually realise the diversity within those Muslim communities and the diversity within those Asian communities. And in Pollock Shields, for instance, there's people from all over South Asia, people of different denominations or sects or religions altogether. But it still does feel like a sort of one community. Do you think there was an aftermath of Kenmure Street, Fatima? Was there a mood in the community? Did it cheer the place up? Was there a kind of sense of power that followed the day?
Well, I think if you were racist, you kept your mouth shut. That was a great little victory. You know,
I think, to be fair, Ratimer, most racists keep their mouth shut around you. So
yeah, well, yeah, I've got my stick. No, I for my sins manage I Love Pollock Shield's Facebook page, and so post after post, people are so proud of the footage they've taken, the photos they took. They actually all wanted to express the wonderful emotions that had gone through the crowd on that page, and of course I allowed it, you know. But there were some comments, tentative comments, like what Amma said. Why were these Sikhs going to the mosque? Well, why not? They're friends, they're colleagues. They went to school together. Of course, I mean, it's what you do. The idea that the Muslim community is either this homogenous mass of Muslims or Asians that are a threat to the state as we know it, or they're all segregated and the Sikhs don't talk to the Muslims and they don't talk to the white people. Nonsense, of course. Communities could never function like that. And it's a myth that's spread as a way of keeping us divided and suspicious of our neighbours and so on, when in reality, people look after each other. Okay, you might be peeved off with your neighbour for whatever, but really you have a shared experience of negotiating that open space of, you know, where you live and so on. The majority of people that live in Pollock Shields were studied in Pollock Shields, went to school in Pollock Shields, work locally. You know, you see each other on a regular basis. And one thing we know is we are not a threat to each other. The only people who were a threat to our community that day are the masses of cops that came in. And can I just say, I loved when we kettled the cops. Oh my God, it was such a great feeling. I loved it. And you know what? I'm a revolutionary socialist, always been proud of that fact. And there are moments like this, which just gives you that little insight of what revolutions must be like, because the euphoria, you can hear it in the crowd, that sense of unity, that sense of solidarity, the sense that we can actually beat these coppers. They might outnumber us, but we can beat them. And not that's just that, we can beat the Home Office. We can beat Priti Patel. That was just the one most. So if you haven't been on one of these demos, start one up, because they're so exhilarating, great for the soul.
I was going to say that, I mean, being there myself, it was probably the first time that I was at something like that. And I'm sure the first time a lot of people that I knew were at something like that as well. And things have felt very hopeless and helpless for a while. And so that win was actually such a big spur on. And it's interesting to think of how joy can be so political, and actually so much more political than anger or frustration. And yeah, having that sense of, oh, you know, direct action can actually help, really empowered people to go out there and do it again in the future. And to get involved when they see something on their Instagram or whatever, not just to go, oh, another bad thing's happening, but to go, wait, that's around the corner. I'll go bother them and maybe something can happen.
I think that's important, Iona, that quite often in sort of community organising terms, you always talk about getting victories. Victories are the most important things. And you quite often aim for small victories. So sort of tenants unions, etc. If you can stop one eviction, if you can stop one person eviction, it empowers your little group to feel as if you can do more. And that's a very important thing, because for many years, I was brought up in a mining town and from a family of miners. So for many years, we suffered defeat after defeat. And there was a sort of sense of despair, I think, for many years, that when are we going to see the next victory? But I do sense that there's a generation of younger people now who are more active, winning things. They seem to be winning the small victories. There was one in Govanhill just weeks ago, a young Romanian woman that was threatened with eviction, and I think 80 people turned up to support her. You know, and I don't know if that was a follow-on from Kenmure Street or not, but there's certainly a feeling that people now believe that they can win.
I think also, Jim, I think I was very conscious of when being at Kenmure Street and Pollock Shields, was that there was sort of organised, you know, politicians and, you know, Westminster politicians, you know, local politicians, trade unions, etc. But they weren't in the driving seat. It was ordinary people that were actually in the driving seat. It was ordinary people that would do the chant. It was ordinary people that were leading the charge, and others who would normally, many years past, would be in the leadership of it, were actually not in the leadership of it. It was, for me, it was very, which when I say the word people power, it was genuine people power that actually dictated what was going to happen that day, that the police had to weigh up, you know, balance the right to protest, public safety and all that. They weren't frightened by You know, they weren't frightened by, you know, an MP or a councillor coming and speaking to say, this is an outrage, you must let them go. What scared them at the end of the day was, you know, the massive numbers. You know, that's, again, as a socialist, what I was always taught was a case of, you know, in terms of the trade union movement, you know, you can lift one finger, but if you actually lift, you know, combine them into a fist, whatever, it's a huge, right? And you saw that a microcosm of what happens when you bring 1,000 people out into the streets. That went from one guy to 10 to 20 to 100, you know, to 1,000 people, and what is conceivable. But also, I think what was important, Sumit said to me a couple of weeks ago when I saw one of the boys that was released, and he said he still cannot believe that he's getting phone calls from family members and from other people around the world, from India, from Canada, from places that this went out, you know, Chile and places like that. That it was broadcast all around the world, you know, and you know, people are going, oh, is that, how come they're doing that there? Why don't they do that in our country? But I think it's a case of it gave inspiration to other people to do it. And also sometimes these victories do happen, but you don't hear about it. And I also I think one of the value, I mean, social media gets a lot of kicking all the time, you know, in terms of Twitter and the feed. But to be honest, I mean, the way that was conducted was the power of actually spreading the word. Activists who are all linked in via social media, being able to communicate and getting that word out fast. It's the same way they've done around the evictions, you know, actually getting the word, you know, you remember the days of the poll tax and protests and bailiffs, etc. And it was done in an old fashioned way. But I mean, you could imagine if they tried to do the poll tax now, you know, how that would instantly develop in terms of trying to stop, you know, eviction. So I think that was also an important lesson of seeing the powerful nature of, you know, of the left, of climate change, there was all sorts of different, you know, activists and protesters. Because people asked me afterwards, why was there Palestinian flags there? And I was like, why not? You know, why is it climate change there? Why you know, why is it SNP? The SNP have organized, you know, to bring down these people and all that. This is government conspiracy. And I went, you're off your heads, basically, because I mean, that was spontaneous. It was crowd, but it was what the best part of it was controlled, but controlled by the crowd themselves. You know, that it was a real people democracy in deciding what was going to happen, which is what it said to the police. This crowd is not for moving. Doesn't matter who speaks to them. If I come down and said, listen, you all need to leave and go home, they weren't going to go home. They weren't going to go home if an MP. They weren't going to go home if Nicola Sturgeon came down and said, listen, you need to go home. At the end of the day, that crowd was not for moving. They'd made their decision. These are our neighbours. Let them go.
I think that was I saw also in the clip where you were speaking, Amber. I saw Iona stand up when they said it was like we have to move aside. I don't know if you noticed yourself, Iona.
Yeah, it was the kids wear a bright yellow jacket.
It was the bright yellow jacket, I noticed. But I get that feeling that day that where maybe the next action will come from. Well, there was almost a feeling that when they reached the mosque in Nithsdale Road and everyone cheered and the police started to go, I think a lot of people just wanted to, you know, there was a kind of almost a reluctance to go there. And it was almost like we could have had a massive party because everyone was so empowered by it, you know.
Towards the end, there was definitely kind of a bit of a festival feeling when we kind of worked how we wanted it to in that instance. And also, I guess, maybe partly one of the reasons why it kind of played out the way it did is we've not really been around that many people in a sort of celebratory for so long. So it was like, I see all these people I know, and great's happened.
I mean, I'd never seen so many smiles on people's faces. I mean, everyone was smiling. And I know after that, people sort of tried to criticize and say, no, this was the highest rate of COVID and infections and all that. And I was going, this is their community. You know, the only reason why people were crammed together was because the police brought in vans. The only reason why people were crammed together was because the police brought in their line of police officers that they tried to disperse. And whilst, you know, the police were giving kudos afterwards, the pictures and the images I saw earlier on was not the policing that I would want to see in Pollokshields, where they tried to do a line to try and push people away. So people shouldn't forget those images, because the questions still haven't been answered really, as in why was there a need, if public safety is paramount, to swamp the area with police? Because it's the police that swamped the area. You know, in the same way that, you know, if we look through the lessons of history, whether it be Toxteth in Liverpool, Moss Side in Manchester, Brixton in London, that's what they do, and on whose orders are they acting? But again, I also think it's a case of these things are still going on. You know, and I said at the end of that, and I spoke publicly about it, and I said that they will be back. they're bruised from that encounter. Priti Patel said, these, called the protesters a mob, spoke in personal sense. And I thought the irony of it, because whenever you're trying to sort of oppose a deportation, the Home Office's instant line is saying, we do not discuss personal details or speak about these issues. Yeah, for some reason that all went to pop. They were willing to speak about the men. They were willing to describe in all sorts of terms. They were willing to speak about the crowd and every reason. So that means they will be back and they will be more organized. And this time around, they will have police with them. So I think people need to be aware of the fact that the agenda is up the scale. Priti Patel wants to bring in offshore, processing asylum seekers, in Africa. And I think I saw the report yesterday in Australia. It's costing them £2 million per asylum seeker to allow them to process them offshore. And just frankly ridiculous.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about the demo, which I think is really, really important, because as a socialist, we always say that struggle changes people's ideas. All the baggage and all the shit that you might have gone to the demo with, that starts to be broken down. And you actually saw that happening in front of you. The Madras that was on the corner there, obviously people turned up. I don't know. Do you know what was ironic? You had all these sort of ferals and sort of people in their sort of almost pajama-like. And then you had all these Asians dressed in the most gorgeous gowns and stuff because it was Eid. But the Madras was open, and all these people who'd never been into a religious building, a Muslim building, were going in to use the bathroom. They had food there, they had water there. And then all of a sudden, other people started bringing food and water and sharing. Things that you would not.
I think that was a very important thing, Fatima. I think if
that will stay with people. That will stay with people. That sense of unity and looking after one another. So I think what happens within that struggle is just as important as the legacy, of winning and so on. But those memories and those that communal feeling of solidarity, I think, cannot be overestimated of what happened there.
Yeah. I think that the little mosque, or madrasa that's on the corner there, there will be people in Pollokshields who are not Muslims who just walk past that place all the time and just wonder what goes on. And that day they got to meet everyone, and they were out there. They put tables out. They were making tea. They brought fruit and crisps and everything. And it was, if anyone lives in that community didn't know them, they knew them then.
There was a guy who turned up with 12 pizzas. This sort of dude, he said, "I've got 3 pizzas. I thought people might be hungry." It was lovely, just beautiful sort of festival, a little festival of the spirit there. Great. We need more of those.
I think we've got a little clip I'd like to show. I think, Jamie, it's number 6, and this is the important clip, because I think we're going to end with, there's a final clip to end on, but I think this is the bit that we all worked towards that day.
red flag, but it's
All the flags. I don't know why it keeps coming up with Nicola Sturgeon meeting the Queen. I don't know if someone's trying to tell us something there.
Emma's punting a book. Oh, what's that book, Emma?
This is one of my favorite photos. It was on the Hollywood magazine. There's a boy called Kevin who took this picture, right? And it's basically the whole crowd surrounding the police as we're sort of marching up, united in opposition, but we're everywhere.
Just pull back a bit, pull back a bit, Emma, pull back a bit. Just a bit more, Is that see that copper and what he's wearing, the Union Jack, the black Union Jack? The amount
I think that's the Blue Lives Matter. Blue Lives Matter
yes,
thing.
that's my point is
right.
Reactionary symbols of police oppression. Let's be honest here, and they were proudly displaying them. And that's the copper right in the front. He was proud.
There is a problem with that. It is a symbol of a police charity, but it's remarkably similar to a kind of American alt-right, all lives matter type of thing. And they know
what they're doing.
And they know, and they know what they're doing wearing it on that day. And I think we're coming to kind of near the end. I don't know if there's been any questions in the chat or not, or if Iona, if you wanted to ask anything else there, or
I kept thinking of questions, and then Amar sort of answered them all along. So
I think the one question, maybe Fatima or Amar, both of you, the one question, which was a kind of theme of the thing, is what have we learned? Is there a short answer as to what we learned from Kenmure Street?
This is
the people united will never be defeated. The people
Excellent.
united will never be defeated. I think that's a slogan that, as long as I've known, it's been politicized, for over 30 years. That's the one that I learned, as a teenager, marching on the streets and knowing that, the strength of numbers can overcome. And also that, there is much more to unite us than there is to divide us. And people are full of despair because of what's happening in society around us. But these little victories was actually not a little victory. It's a huge victory that, had an impact worldwide in terms of people around the world watching it. And, the name Pollock Shields, people know now about Pollock Shields. They know about this day. And as Fatima's quite right, and other people are quite right, that they will remember this day until the day they die. Because that will be something that ranks up there as one of the top moments of your life, having been there, having won, having succeeded, having fought, having protested, and knowing that you can actually overcome a UK government, a huge amount of policing, and you can still win it. Because it won't just have been people who are protesting there. There'll be people who were miners. There'll be people who are nurses. There'll be people who have been firefighters. The people who are at Grenfell. The people who, at various other, movements up and down this country who will have gone, that represents us, and they will seem that they will have taken hope from that.
Yeah.
And this is the way to beat Priti Patel, in numbers and united, and that feeling of hope. And it also says something to other oppressed groups, who might be feeling shit, that if we can come together in numbers, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement or whatever, and the street is where it's at. These are our streets. We need
the streets. That's an important point. I think one of the things we did in Govan Hill was from about 2013 onwards, we've had an annual International Roma Day parade. And if you only listen to social media, you'd think that loads of people in Govan Hill do not like their Roma neighbours. When you go onto the streets, it's a completely different attitude. You see that these people are louder than on social media they are in real life. And I think, Amar, actually, you said that 2017, I think it was, when we had the big Rock Again festival at Queen's Park. And I'm pretty sure you said that day. It's when we go onto the streets and take to the streets for things like this that you realise that you're not alone,
Yeah, I think, as Iona said, after the period that we've been through, I think what's really important, what people have been missing, I know myself over the course of the last year and a half, is that we've been fighting campaigns, stuff like the Shikubayo campaign, other cases that we've been dealing with. And what's been missing from that whole is actually people out in the streets, the rallies, the demonstrations, the protests, and folk just desperate to have that again. Because actually it's not, as you said, the carnival atmosphere of when people actually come together, the smiles and that feeling of unity, and when some people won't even speak somebody else's language, but it's humanity and it's the politics of it that crosses you know, the barrier of language and things like which we actually saw on that day.
Totally. And after having spent such a long period of time kind of isolated from one another, often only interacting via sort of arguments on social media platforms, to actually like be within each other's humanity and see each other's faces and kind of be joined together in something that was joyful, I think was really inspiring for a lot of people, and will be something that buoys people to keep pushing forward. But I think that's probably quite a good place to wrap up. So I'll, on behalf of Bella Caledonia, I'll thank Fatima and Amar for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Jamie for organizing this. And also thank you to people who've been watching. Jim, I believe you had a final clip you wanted to play out with.
Yeah, Jamie, I don't think we need to come back after this clip, but there is the final clip, which I think it's the final thing of the day. I think it was the final moment of victory. Thank you all. Thanks, Iona.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
And they're very, very appreciative today that what you have done, what Alison Tullis, Chris, Amar, Anas, many other MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, in the British Parliament. But above all, you know, it is you who have done the job. But these boys want to say thank you to you in Punjabi. Even if you don't understand, that means thank you. He's very, very appreciated.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye,
you.
folks.
Thank you.
See you later.